Nearly 80 years ago, a symbolic Iron Curtain descended across Europe, cutting off Central and Eastern European countries from freedom and growth. These nations fell under the influence and control of Moscow. Although they never lost hope that the Soviet domination could be conquered one day, their march toward independence was long and painful. Let's walk this path again to remind the future generations of Europeans that their world can be questioned and peace should not be taken for granted. We have to fight for it.
This is a quite famous place in Budapest, famous because it is named after József Bem, the Polish general who supported the Hungarian Revolution centuries ago.
Bem is a big symbol of the Hungarian revolutions. You know, Bem was a big supporter of the Hungarian Revolution and Independent War in 1848, you know, and he had so much to us in previous revolution and Independent War. That's why he was also a famous person among Hungarians at that time.
Poland, and we are making a documentary.
Yeah.
Could you tell us, do you know this square in 56? Are you from Hungary?
Yeah, I'm from here, but I'm not really familiar with like what actually happened right here. No idea.
We are making a documentary.
So we have to go.
Actually, we don't really know.
No idea.
No idea.
Revolution maybe.
Yeah, but I don't speak it's happening.
It was a revolution against the Russian communists and to gain independence from the Russian influence over Hungary. And yeah, it didn't succeed. I mean, the Russians came in with tanks, I believe.
Hungarians was fighting against communism because they want to be free.
This happened exactly in 1956 when just before the Hungarian Revolution against the communist regime at that time, some demonstrations in Poland took place, and originally the students at the Technical University organized a sympathy demonstration for the Polish friends.
The Hungarian students and also factory workers appeared here, they met here, it was a big gathering, it was a big protest.
And this was first announced on this place, then the crowd, which originally the organizers thought would be 50,000 people, but it was exhausted and inflated to 200,000. they moved over to the building of the parliament to express the wishes of the people to the Hungarian government.
After this gathering, basically it was obvious that Hungary wants to reach the independence. Hungary wants to change the regime and wants to continue its life without the Russians, without the Soviet Union, without communism. And after this event, the uprising turned into a violent conflict between the Soviets and between the Hungarian riots.
This was perhaps the first major demonstration against the communist rule in the Soviet bloc. And it then turned to a quite bloody civil war and also the occupation of Hungary through the Soviet forces ended, unfortunately, this revolution. We called the event revolution, but nevertheless, it was the first important warning sign for the communist leaders of this part of the world that people will not take that card, they will not obey this unhuman regime, and they would like to have something better, something more human.
If you look at the history of Hungary, I think this is the most important revolution of Hungary. This made the Western empires, the Western countries, think that the Hungarians can stand up for their liberty. I think this is the main part of the Hungarian identity nowadays, of how we think about our liberty.
To me, the wall would be symbolic of like freedom.
Good vibes. Beautiful street art.
Evolution, maybe, how the world is progressing.
Right now, as it is painted after the fall, I think it's a good symbol because it shows us that we can overcome the issues and the problematic issues, of course. But if we go back in time, it's a bad symbol.
40 years or something, yeah, was dividing the city because of the politics.
After the war, Germany was split up into 4 zones, each separated from the others by political and economic barriers.
The only remaining hole in the Iron Curtain is in Berlin. All along the sector border, working under heavy guard, East German construction laborers tear up streets and erect barriers. More than 160 kilometers in length, a fence is constructed around the entire perimeter of West Berlin. The wall divides families, friends, and lovers. During the Cold War, the wall becomes the symbol of the world's division into East and West.
My family escaped from the German Democratic Republic in 1961, half a year before the wall was constructed. For me, the Berlin Wall is a symbol. Being a student from West Berlin, I didn't know any different reality. We felt the urge to avoid the wall. We knew where it was built, and my bike never went towards it. It was impossible to cross it. You had to always turn right or left a block earlier. There are people who grew up in Berlin and who didn't see the wall for years because you just didn't go there.
Berlin Wall, it's just like
tragedy because lots of people have suffered under this wall. You just wake up and you just find out that you cannot visit your parents or you cannot visit your relative. So I think that it's something against the liberty and against human rights. It's very difficult when I try to imagine myself in a system like this.
I don't think anyone's freedom should be physically barricaded. I don't think that's right.
It was a sad thing for these people.
My parents left their homeland for a very specific reason. We were called economic immigrants, but it was clear to us that here we had freedom. As a young person, I sometimes visited my relatives. I was permitted to travel to East Germany to see my cousins, and paradoxically felt a big difference between us. My cousins were my age, they spoke the same language, but they thought in a completely different way. I once tried to explain to them how currency worked in the capitalist system. Although we spoke the same language, we could not understand one another, because we grew up in completely different systems.
When Wall was destroyed, fall in 1989, I think it was one of the best moments of Germany.
It was wonderful. It felt so unreal. We found it hard to believe that we could suddenly walk freely along the streets of this town. And my father, after several decades, was able to return to the place where he grew up and where he had his whole family.
The Berlin Wall was built in 1961 and today we're 2020 and there are lots of walls, and also metaphorical walls against immigrants, for example. Here, fortunately, there is no wall anymore.
I think it's great that it was destroyed, but I think it's good that obviously they kept a little bit of it. It's important to remember, and you can remember best if you can still see it.
Now you can see like all this hopeful message and like this new message for the future generations.
Today it's like a lesson learned, and we can all learn from it, I guess.
This gate is a symbol of peaceful transformation. The first time when communists started to talk with opposition. And it is a beginning of a new era.
The symbol that even there might not be Poland on the map, the Poland will be forever there in our hearts.
It's definitely a symbol of the struggle that we had here in the communist times. It's definitely a symbol of freedom and symbol of change that happened in Europe, and it all started right here at this gate in this place.
It witnessed a couple of major events. The first strike during December 1970, one day after the prices of food went horribly up, and 3 persons were killed in front of the gate. It also witnessed another strike during 1980, and a couple of other events as well.
I drove through this gate with a car full of bread on the 3rd day of the strike, and this is how I got involved with the strike. It was a gate that opened, received gifts, and then closed so that people could meet. Even though it was closed most of the time, it became such a gateway to freedom.
I was filming here for probably 12 days, last 12 days of the strike. When I had free time, I was just walking to feel the atmosphere of the strike at the gate. That was the main gate of communication between the people in Poland, in Gdańsk in particular, and the striking workers inside. To come to the shipyard, you should cross this gate. The workers had the possibility to see their family members. That was really moving. They could communicate across the bars. So they were even kissing, but across the bars. The meetings were really very emotional. Poland was a little bit a kind of enfant terrible of the Eastern Bloc. 56, there was the riot. 68, there was the students' riot. 70, there was a first big strike here in Gdańsk Shipyard. After 10 years, when really the economy was falling down and everybody could feel it, especially the workers of big factories or places like shipyard. The wave of very soft strikes started in the summer 1980 in Poland and came to the Gdańsk Shipyard, and this place became the heart of the big strike in Poland.
It was a strike for a dignified human life. It is about having the right to freedom, justice, free courts, democracy and a decent life. That's why we went on strike back then. This strike became a solidarity thing. The representatives of other workplaces and all those who wanted to join the strike movement were here. The shipyard determined the rhythm of life, of important events, and to a large extent everything was happening around this gate.
That was the place where, on the 31st of August, Lech Wałęsa appeared above the gate and declared that agreement is signed. We start our independent trade unions. And the big trade union was named Solidarity.
Mamy wreszcie niezależne, samorządne związki zawodowe. Mamy prawo do strajku.
This was a turning point in our recent history. If it hadn't been for the signing of these agreements, the fact that Solidarity could exist for a year and a half as a trade union, an institution on the basis of which a great movement, a great revolution, a great national uprising was based, we could not be living in a free country now. The communists were aware of the symbolic meaning of the gate. There were flowers on it all the time and a portrait of the Pope. They wanted to destroy symbols, and this gate became a symbol.
Ogłaszam, że w dniu dzisiejszym ukonstytuowała się Wojskowa Rada Ocalenia Narodowego. Rada Państwa w zgodzie z postanowieniami Konstytucji prowadziła dziś o północy stan wojenny na obszarze.
On December 13th, when martial law was introduced, the shipyard went on strike again. A lot of people came here. The communists ran the gate over with tanks.
Musi być decyzja o użyciu broni, bo możemy strzelać amunicję ostro. Czołgi ustawić tak, żeby można było jak najszybciej je podciągnąć, jak najszybciej do bramy albo do bram. I na tych kierunkach się będą atakować. A przede wszystkim na bramę środkową, jak zrozumiałeś odbiór.
When the Solidarity was reborn and led our country to semi-free elections in '89 in June, soon after it happened in neighbor countries.
This is a major place in our taking independence back from the Soviet Union, and the destroying of the Berlin City Wall was strictly influenced by what happened there at the gate.
Everything what we wanted happened. What was the basic, the top idea was the hunger for democracy. Poland was a totalitarian country. There was a kind of semi-soft terror, but still it was something completely opposite to democracy. And what Solidarity asked for was democracy. And we've got it.
This is a wall of freedom, so everyone can say what it got in its heart.
It's colorful and it's cool for photos and stuff.
Human rights freedoms and civic rights freedoms, which we do have up to a certain point in the Czech Republic right now.
Every time when it's something happening in the world, people are just reacting and then writing on the wall what they want, so it's just like wall of news.
Today, people write their inscriptions on Facebook and social network. In old days, the young people wouldn't believe that, but there was no internet. And so the walls were sort of social network display where people wanted to express something. The wall started as an innocent place where young people went to write some romantic poems, they were in love. It's a romantic place in Prague. But it got its meaning by time. It's a very typical thing that in the regime like communist regime, very, I would say, innocent activity in public place can be seen as a dangerous and subversive to the regime. If you do something out of your creativity, especially in the public space, it's looked with suspicion. And so that's what happened to this wall. The regime was seeing it as, oh, this is some activity which is not under control. The young people in the communist countries, they were looking to Western music as something, as a symbol of freedom. And that was in the phase of when the communist regime was already crumbling. There was perestroika in Soviet Union, so people started to do various activities, to do fun in the public, just the humor. Some were serious, idealistic movement of people, and that was the Peace Club of John Lennon, which actually had some link to this wall.
It was, let's say, a certain sign that, let's say, the freedom could be expressed that time in the communistic time. Now, of course, after Velvet Revolution, everything has changed for us.
The wall got many meanings during time. It was repainted many times, usually by authorities, but in times of freedom, recently, it has been repainted by some artists. They just painted it with white and put there only "War is over," similar slogan to John Lennon's phrase, "War is over." The real history of this wall tells you something about the history of this country.
I don't know the history of this wall. I don't know it. It's sad, but I don't.
If I think of ways to express people's political opinions, I often think of other ways of expressing myself, and the John Lennon Wall wouldn't be the first thing that would come to mind for me.
For those who are not comfortable to go to the demonstrations and have the flags and shout slogans and show it in this way, I think the people came hidden in the darkness and they did something here. Now it's different. You can see cameras here watching who is doing what here. The surveillance is here. It's nothing the communists even dreamt about. They would love to have the cameras here and to control the freedom of expression. But I mean, these days, this is just a symbol that if there are no other ways to express, then people find a way. You cannot suppress the free expression for a long time. It always finds its way, very strangely sometimes. And that's what happened here. It's not a sacred place. It's not the only place where you can express what you think. But it shows you this kind of energy which is there, which cannot be suppressed. That's the story of this wall, and that's the story of our countries, which for a long time were living in under fear.
anything about the Baltic Way? No.
I don't know. I don't have time. Sorry.
Have you heard about the Baltic Way?
No.
Oh. Oh.
Excuse me?
The Baltic Way.
What kind of way?
What was it?
Oh. Oh, actually, I forgot. History wasn't my strong side.
Baltic Way?
Yes.
I don't know.
I can't tell. But
I don't know.
we don't know.
Baltic Way, I participated in this 30 years ago. It was a miracle at that time.
In Estonia, we call it the Baltic Chain because like people actually made a chain using their hands, right? From Tallinn to Vilnius.
It was from here to Estonia, so.
From Cathedral Square and to Riga and Tallinn as well. So from Vilnius to Tallinn, I don't know kilometers, but you can imagine that.
Roughly speaking, 600 kilometers, little bit less than 2 million people.
2 million people shaking their hand, yes, I think, from Tallinn to Riga.
That was a symbol that we want to get free from the Soviet Union.
It's to show that all three Baltic nations are standing together versus, the Soviet hardliners.
The idea was created at the meeting of the leaders of popular movements, those who wanted to restore democracy and independence of Baltic states. Each country appointed its responsible person from the board of the movement, and I was responsible in Latvia. The most important was without mobile phones and computers to reach the grassroots of popular movement. What was the challenge? Large pieces going through the forests where the habitation is not a dense one. And that's why we divided every kilometer in 100 meters and assigned a responsible person to find the necessary quantity of people who can cover that part of 100 meters. In the afternoon, when the people began to come together for the way, I was almost sick of worry. Will we cover? Will we succeed?
We took a bus and we picked a spot in a place in town, and we just stood in a line, and so did the rest of the population all over the country. It was something completely new, never experienced before.
Back then I was 19 years old, so just finished high school, this kind of very exciting summer, all this wind of freedom. It's very special if you grow up in Soviet time and everything is restricted and forbidden.
I forgot many details from this time, but very good remember my feelings. Gates of big prison, little by little, is opening. It was for me something new, and I will remember until my death.
I understood the meaning and importance of the very event. We were declaring that we, here in the Baltic states, we belong to the West. And it was always for us very clear. And what's happening in 1989, it was declaration that's normal. We are back to the West. It's so natural, and simply we have to express it by standing together. We three nations were united for one purpose: be back to the West, to the Western democracies. And that time was the feeling of solidarity. Solidarity for the sake of freedom.
Part of Soviet Union, and finally we realized that we want to be independent. It was one of the first steps for us, for the resilience against communism.
The day it was made marks the 50th anniversary of Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which was signed in 1939, which divided Eastern Europe between Germany and Soviet Russia. It was really important to make the Baltic Way in just that day, to show everybody in the world
how really bad was this decision and how it was actually criminal.
That particular event basically predetermined the future of the Baltic states and other Eastern European countries, which fell under communism and, well, basically were placed under the guidance and protection of Soviet Union. But of course it wasn't a peaceful regime, but a totalitarian one, and that is why this pact is so significant to Latvian history and the history of many other Eastern European nations.
As I put myself in those people's shoes, I think that I would be very scared at that time because there's a lot of unknownness and uncertainty.
I think it is incredible that people really had that urge to go. They didn't know what was going to happen to them.
Couldn't be safe. There was a lot of Russian soldiers here in Vilnius, but we didn't have anything to lose at that moment. We lost our independence in 1940, and now we have to do something about it, to be an independent country, to be a part of European family. We were aware, even if I were then really young, like 30 years ago, of the risks. And you read the history, you live in that, you experience this regime, this system.
In a way, we felt invincible. And now, with all the experience what I have, and also with all archives being open, I know that any day there could be blood.
Soviet army was quite big, huge in Vilnius, in other cities, few hundreds thousand, and a lot of tanks and so on.
I don't remember that I was afraid. At this moment, it was like they can't kill like hundreds of people on the roads. That wouldn't be possible. There was also kind of no stepping back now, because Soviet Union, it was in chaos. Kind of, you cannot continue in this union. This is going down. The money losing its worth, nothing really happening positive way. So it's more like this, it's now or never.
With each next manifestation, each next decision, the border of what is allowed and acceptable was moved a step farther. And I think by this tactics and strategy, and also with the huge support of population, we were able to confuse those who were on the power. They were also confused because of this reform and glasnost in Communist Party. So we used the only window of opportunity which was given Baltic states by the history.
We were together, and when you are together as a nation, not only as a people, but as a nation, as a society, the feeling is different. So you are not really so scared.
You can scare people when you have smaller groups, but when you have three countries standing on a road like this, that was a clear sign, this is it. You cannot stop these people.
Actually, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia didn't even have that much in common culturally prior to those events. But we were all united in that same wish for freedom.
As a history enthusiast, I have a hard time telling you what it actually meant globally, because we don't really know if that had any effect on the regime tumbling. However, I think it was more impactful for the people living in the Baltic states, because for them it was their protest, their way to go out and kind of do something and kind of stand against their own fear. In Latvia, because we are such a small country, that was one of the times where we really proved that even though we're small, we're mighty.
My parents also participated in it, so when I was a child, I very loved to hear about it, and that's the way they told me about Lithuania's history, about freedom, and how worthy it is.
Very many people from my family were massacred and deported to Siberia during Soviet occupation. My family members also joined the Baltic Way, and It really showed the whole Europe and the whole world how much we, three little Baltic countries, want to be independent.
And my grandparents and my parents were the ones who waged the battle against communism in the 1980s. It has always been quite important for me to listen to that and the difficulties that they have gone through. But I think that also these family stories are important in every Latvian family, as far as I know, because these events are so prominent in our collective consciousness.
My father was part of the chain, my friends' fathers were part of the chain.
Grandma and parents, they told us about it, and of course we always were talking and celebrating in schools. Every year we were feeling and the proud about this Baltic Way.
If you are checking newspapers, especially Western media, before this Baltic Chain or Baltic Way, about these democratization movements in Baltics, it's written maybe half a passage, something small and almost like a joke. But when you are connecting three capitals, it's of course the first page news. So obviously, Spiegel in Germany, like the New York Times and all of that, it kind of grabbed their attention. So that kind of made our democratization movements more serious. And yeah, with the more attention from the West, of course, it was easier to do the democratical way of the change.
It is a unique thing, the phenomena of the Baltic Way. But on the other hand, it is a common stand for those who fight who insist on the principle of freedom and freedom to choose and decide to live the way they want. So it's really expressing solidarity.
In times of crisis, the Baltic states are still very united because we do have this shared history, we do have this shared sense of fight, and all three states are super tiny, so on a global scale we understand that we're interconnected. On day-to-day matters, of course, sometimes opinions differ, but I think if we were to face huge crises, these three states would be able to be connected and would stay with this sense of unity.
If we were to transfer my grandparents magically somehow through a time machine to where we are now, then they would be pleasantly surprised.
We are much better off economically, but of course this also the sense that I don't need to keep my mouth shut even if I'm, for example, against the government.
The thing about advantages living in the system that we are living in right now are, for me personally, that I can actually do something about the disadvantages.
We like to complain about our democracy. Yes, there are problems, but if you see what was the problem in '56 and in the communist regime, I think we can see the difference is huge.
The limitations of freedom today cannot be compared with the communist regime's very brutal oppression.
Oppression, violation of human rights, silencing of people because they said something different, thought differently, or lived and loved differently, is fortunately all behind us. I'm happy about it every day.
What communists did was not just that killed some people, but they've taken the bodies and souls of people.
We benefited a lot from the freedom and we enjoy it, but it does not mean that is again for granted.
Freedom is not given once and for all. It is not guaranteed. You have to take care of freedom in a similar way that you care for love and friendship. It's not something you own.
When, the Berlin Wall, another wall, fell down and all the barriers were falling 30 years ago, we were hoping that the freedom can be secured once for all. But I mean, we've realized that it's a struggle for every generation.
My generation often takes freedom for granted because we were just born in that time and it's all we know. But the good thing is that our parents can tell us stories, and when you put it into perspective, it was so recent that we didn't have this freedom.
We need to remember how we can appreciate all the things we have today, all the casual things we have today that our parents didn't have.
When we know past, the present and everything that is going on is like become clear to us.
It's good to remember some stuff, but I think it would be better if we learn something from that.
It's always better to learn from somebody else's mistake than to make them yourself. So that's a key thing about history.
The history likes to turns. It goes around in circles. If you don't know what happened just before, you might not realize what's going on in the moment.
I think there's a big problem right now. We don't get involved, and we really should be.
Our neighbors' country are in difficult situation. Ukraine, Belarus, and Hong Kong, and whatever other countries are perfect examples that not everything is good here today, and we need to be and stand together with them.
There are people and organizations that connect young people who want democracy, and they speak out loud about what they want, about how things should change.
If the right cause came about, and if they really saw something that all of them were connected towards, then yes, definitely. I think young people would be ready to go and would be able to look back in history and see these examples where that actually worked, to be inspired from.
Because it's our recent history, and this is because we are free, we are standing here right now, and we could do whatever we want. So it is very, very crucial to still have this freedom spirit, freedom-wanting spirit in our hearts, in our brains and our souls.
"1989 was a turning point in the history of this region. Between February, when the roundtable talks started in Poland, and November, when the Berlin Wall was destroyed, all Central and Eastern European countries got back their freedom. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. The Russian Federation emerged, and 14 former Soviet republics regained or proclaimed their independence, including Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Ukraine. Today, Ukraine is fighting for its independence again, against the invasion of Russia, which wants to rebuild its old sphere of influence. 30 years after the dawn of freedom in this region, history seems to be taking turns. Let's not repeat the mistakes of the past, and not let the dusk last another half a century.